What questions do children have that we are not prepared to answer? You're anticipating the responsive aspect. Nice. What causes children to begin looking outside of their home or origin communities for new answers and for new questions? For me, it was questions of identity, the question of who I am. What is my relationship to my body and the bodies of others? Am I to be a servant to what other people expect me to be, or do I follow the call I feel within my heart? And despite the best efforts of many adults in my life, my home community did not have the space for me to explore those questions to their full extent. I had to go searching beyond my home, first to college, then to seminary, and now even into the present here in Washington. I, still a child in many ways, needed to escape, to explore the questions that the adults, the communities that I was raised within, were not prepared to answer or to hold space for. And so I ask again, and this time I would like you to respond by discussing it with one another. What questions do children have that we are not prepared to answer, or what questions did you have that led you to look outside of your own home community for new answers and new questions? I invite you to find a group of people around you, be attentive to all those around you who might not be as mobile, make sure to include everyone, and discuss what questions children or you have that their communities are not prepared to answer. Go ahead. On Christmas Eve, I called for a children's theology of liberation, and whether or not you were there, or whether you remember Christmas Eve, I would like us to continue to consider where a children's theology of liberation may be led by Jesus, the disruptive, disrespectful, disobedient teenager who insisted on leading with questions at a young age and not just being led. Our Messiah, who in this passage from Luke, as a child, dared to ask the questions his parents were unprepared to answer, despite all of their love and care for him. There are many points where this passage can guide a growing children's theology of liberation. For instance, the importance of community is lifted up at the beginning of this passage. The wisdom that it takes a village to raise a child is affirmed, as Mary and Joseph cannot find Jesus and simply assume that he is simply being taken care of by the other travelers, relatives, community members whom they trust to prioritize his safety. A fascinating affirmation of the truth, well documented, that the more safe and trustworthy adults in a child's life increases their survival and flourishing. But what reforms and revolutions does our society need to arrive at a place where a plenitude of adults can be trusted to uphold the safety, respect, and dignity of a child? It's almost unthinkable in the modern day. Additionally, we can receive a confirmation of the importance of tradition in providing a foundation and language for the growing gifts of a child. Mary and Joseph take Jesus to the festival of Passover every year, making a difficult journey so that Jesus may know where he comes from and may know that he is loved, safe, and saved, may know that there is a place for him in his religious world. Indeed, he so thoroughly has received this message by the point of 12 years old that he determines correctly that the true children's place in worship is in the pulpit. But the major point of children's theology of liberation that I want to identify in today's frankly hilarious passage of teenage sass and rebellion is the essential role of consent and self-determination in the relationship between children, their parents, and adults. For the question of consent is the heart of this one story we have of Jesus' relationship with his parents and his ministry of God talk between the point of his birth and the beginning of his adult ministry. The central question of consent comes from the exchange between Jesus and his parents, when Mary and Joseph ask, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." And I want to be sensitive here to Mary and Joseph. Missing a child, that's terrifying. That is objectively terrifying. And Jesus probably could have, told them that he was going to stay behind in the temple or something. But still, observe the direction of their language and see what it reveals about our adult-centered way of viewing the world. Why, child, do you hurt me? Why, child, do you not see that we are right and you are wrong? Why, child, do you not appreciate what we have done for you? Why, child, do you not realize that what I am doing is for your own good? Why, child, do you refuse to become like me? Without a doubt, any of us older than the age of 4 can remember receiving words like these at some point in our lives. And any of us older than 22, that might even be generous, have said these words in some way or other to a child. And in doing so, we have reinforced the idea that the purpose of children is to become adults, whether they want to or not. Instead of choosing the side of children, we choose the side of a society that is not built for them, whose only value for children is that they one day may become adults, with words that reinforce the power of adults over children. We force them into a life of conformity without their consent. And we are all guilty of this sin. Every aspect of our society is corrupted by the sin of forcing children to become adults without their consent. Even the child-focused systems of education, the medical world, even and especially religion, are part of the project of turning children into adults. And in doing so, we turn children into products to be passed from owner to owner, steward to steward, until they reach the point of growth where they either become useful to society or are discarded, forgotten, and ignored. And kids know this sin. They can see the grand project built around turning them into adults, and they see how the adults that they trust cannot protect them from this system. Why do we think that there are so high, or why the rates of anxiety, depression, and the wide variety of mental health conditions are on the rise for younger and younger ages? It has never been more apparent to kids from a younger age that the true purpose of their childhood is to be turned into adults against their will. And it is either too much for them to bear, or, like Jesus, they learn how to be obedient, attend to the feelings that adults take out on them, and offer their obedience to protect the adults they love, agreeing, but not really, to the inevitable adult-centered societal project of forcing children to become adults. But before Jesus offers obedience, he interjects, disrupts with words of rebellion that uphold his God-given right to consent and self-determination by questioning the authority that his parents have over him, and all of the dangerous questions that come from his childishness. When his parents ask, "Why, child, did you not realize that we were searching for you?" which really just means, "Why, child, do you refuse to become like me?" Jesus responds by declaring, "Why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I would be here in my parents' house?" Jesus throws that great why question back onto his parents. He questions their very right to question him. He challenges them to defend their right to assume that their emotions, their priorities, are more important than his own. He challenges them to defend a society built upon the oppression of children, that declares that adults have the right to control children. Jesus, through his questions, declares that children are not the property of adults, but people fully and wholly, dearly loved children of God, filled with every good gift of existence, raised up like Jeremiah to be prophets in this world, given the power to build, to plant, to pluck up, and destroy. Not because of their potential as adults, but for the questions that they bear from their childishness. They have the potential to bring God's desired revolution to all of society. Jesus declares that children are not the property of anyone, but are the full inheritors of God's promises. Jesus reminds us that there is no one who better knows the love and justice and hope and truth of God than a child. And Jesus challenges us to question whether it is really so good to become an adult, after all, to enter into that project of conformity, or whether we lose some element of divine childishness when we conform to adulthood without our consent. Jesus restores our right to always say no to any disrespect towards ourselves or our bodies, assuring us that just as children ought to be worthy of all the respect, autonomy, and self-determination that the universe has to offer, so are we worthy. So shed the adulthood of conformity, Jesus says, be restored to our childishness, and come dwell in our parents' house together. Come be restored to a consensual relationship with all God's creation that knows no power over another, but only the dynamic of radical equality, trust, and love, a life of constant questions. Jesus' parents were unable to understand this invitation or to receive it. And who can blame them? It is hard in our adult privileging society for adults to enter into a consent-based relationship with children. It carries a lot of risk. It carries a responsibility to let the most revolutionary parts of ourselves lead. It calls us to unleash the questions that we were taught were too dangerous to ask. And fear not, for grace abounds. And even as Jesus entered begrudgingly into the conformity of obedience, he never lost his childishness. His ministry of life was childish. His teachings were childish. His law of love was childish. His refusal to give up his life of love, even unto death, was childish. His cross was childish. His refusal to die was childish. His resurrection was childish. Jesus' grace abounds, is freely given, and reminds us that it is never too late to be restored to a childish relationship of love and consent with the whole world. And at the close of this sermon, I owe you an example of what a consensual relationship between adults and children looks like. What is a relationship of self-determination that changes the dynamic of our society? Let me offer a story. I was a fresh out of college youth minister in small town Minnesota, and I really wanted the kids to like me. And I tried the strategy suggested to me of showing off how smart I was, and they weren't impressed. So I tried commanding respect and authority, and they weren't impressed. And I tried to control how the kids felt about me, and they weren't impressed. All it led me to do was feel overwhelmed and miserable and lead events and lessons that blew up in my face in front of the kids and made me look like a fool. But then, one Wednesday afternoon, when I was feeling like an inevitable failure while leading a hangout at the church for the kids in the middle of winter, one of the kids who had been playing in the snow outside asked me to come outside, saying that someone had slipped and needed help. So I rushed outside, and I didn't notice that kid smile as they closed the door behind me, only to find that no one was injured, and I was now surrounded by 20 kids and 3 adult volunteers, all holding snowballs. And while I faced the utter barrage of snowballs, I smiled, proud, because I realized that the kids had finally consented to having me as their leader at this church, because they trusted me enough to take the fullness of their mischievousness. And that led to being able to trust me with the fullness of their questions. And I tell you today, dear church, that until we are ready to take a barrage of snowballs from the children in our church and in our world, be they literal or metaphorical snowballs, we will remain a place that children will have to escape to ask the question that bring God's blazing rebellion and revolution. But if we can take the snowballs to the gut, as we've already heard today, we've already heard the questions that kids are asking. What a beautiful, fun, loving, transformative world we could live in together, adults and children, freed to be childish, dwelling together in their parents' house.